So Dan, welcome.
Thanks for
Thanks for having us.
Great to have you back.
Just give us a rough idea. Just give us a little bit of an idea of your your coaching journey up to this point.
Yeah, so my journey, I first started coaching in about 2004. I started in two places. I walked into the foundation sort of branch here at Wolves, just wanting to volunteer, going into schools, and then I also managed to join a grassroots club, a local one down the road called New Park Village. They were the first two places to really sort of take me on and do some coaching. From there, I was working at the foundation. I met a guy that was working there who moved into the academy, and I was able to bring me across to the academy. So initially, again, I started volunteering. I would just be the person who would come in and work the skills with the under-9s age group, until eventually, I managed to, secure a part-time place at the club.
So you said you've been here 15 years now at the academy.
Yeah.
Wow. So give us a little rough idea of like the different roles you've had within that time.
Yeah. So again, I started as, I guess you could call me the skills coach.
Yeah.
So I just came in 1 hour on a Saturday morning just to work the skills with the younger players that we had. I then was the assistant for the under-9s age group. That's when I started part-time. And then I went on to lead the foundation. So after leading various groups within the academy, I then was the lead of the foundation phase from 9s to 12s. And then now I've moved into a role of more individual specific coaching.
So what's your JD now? What's your job title now?
Yeah, so my job title at the minute is the individual specialist. So the individual specific sort of technical coach for the 9s to 14s.
And how long have you been doing that?
12 months now.
All right. So 9s to 14, individual technical coach.
Yeah.
Specifically. So then, give us an idea. Then, what does that look like? Day to day, week. Give us an idea of your role. Obviously that's quite a unique role. It's quite forward. You're obviously a forward-thinking academy. We know that. I've known you guys a long time. It's quite not a lot of people have this sort of role, but obviously you're breaking new ground. Give us an idea what that role sort of looks like in practice. Yeah.
So in an essence, my job is just to improve the players separate to the actual main training session. So what we found is that obviously you'd always have sort of two coaches working with the group, and there might be moments or times in the training session where you'd wished that you'd been able to work specifically with one player, maybe on one technical aspect. Right. So essentially I'm sort of the third wheel, the third person that comes into a training session and works with those players. Sometimes it will be players that are really good at something that we just want to really enhance and make even better. Sometimes it'll be with the players that are really struggling on a technical aspect, so they can work without the pressure of being around the rest of the group and just work on developing those.
So a really interesting role, obviously, a new role. And how does that work in terms of structure? So obviously you used to be lead coach of the 9s to 10s, right?
Yeah.
9s to 11s, the foundation phase. And how do you work? Do you work alongside are you working under the foundation lead, or how do you sit in the hierarchical structure of the academy, if that makes sense? I'm just interested, in terms of structural viewpoint. Yeah,
so I work alongside the coaches. So the coaches still lead their age groups. So in terms of the age groups that they have, I won't come into the session and tear their session apart. They will still plan their sessions. But what we'll do is we'll work together more collaboratively. Right. So there'll be moments in the sessions where actually they can just stay with the group and I can work with the players whilst they're in the session, maybe pull them to a side. There will be times when I can specifically come in and take them out of a session, or come in on a separate day to their training sessions and then work with the players then, just depending on what their availability is and what best suits the player.
So how does that work in terms of like planning, for example? So, for example, we've seen a couple of great sessions this morning, 9s and 10s. Coaches are playing a 9s and 10 session. Do they say, look, here's an opportunity for you to work, or you approaching them saying, look, I want to take these players out and maybe use that? Is this a good time? How does that work, that relationship with the coaches, the team coaches?
Yeah, so I think, pretty much at the start of the week, I'll have a schedule of when I'm going to be in. So then I'll tailor when I'm going to be into the training sessions and the groups that are going to be in. Once the coaches know what session they expect to see me at, then we can plan for that session specifically what's going to happen. So is it going to be me working with a small group of players that need to work on maybe say defending techniques? Is it going to be me taking out one player, maybe while the small-sided game's going on because they need that extra work? So we'll kind of do that at the start of the week. We'll have the conversations and then I'll plan from there what we're going to do.
And you mentioned obviously defending there. So give us an idea about obviously the coaches are working towards the curriculum and the methodology of the club. What's your curriculum then as an individual technical coach? How does that work? What are you thinking about where, in terms of what you're delivering? Where does that come from?
Yeah, so that comes from basically the four corner model that we have, and we have basically our phase model. So we'll have a attacking, build-up play. We'll have obviously out of possession play, and then what I'll do is I'll just pick out the technical aspects from the topics that the guys work on. So the 9 to 12 they have their technical program. Yeah. So I'll look at what week they're on. If they're on maybe say a finishing week, then I might be taking out players that specifically need the finishing. So the coaches will still be working on finishing topics, but there might be one or two players specifically, maybe the strikers, that I can really hone in on some different techniques if they're a little bit better, or they need something different to the midfielders finishing or the defenders finishing.
Yeah, interesting. So then we were chatting earlier, and we were watching a session, and you mentioned it's a different role, it's a different experience for you. There's a lot of maybe watching, rather than doing what you used to. Tell us about the challenges or the differences between what you usually do in academy football.
Yeah, and I think probably the main one is after spending so many years leading, almost giving up, say, that sort of power, if you want to call it, or the kind of control of the session,
right.
And being willing and ready to step in as and when needed. Again, it's more for me to work alongside coaches as opposed to do something separate to the coaches. So it can be quite difficult if you've been coaching a group for a long time to all of a sudden see two coaches working and understand that maybe they're doing a session that doesn't require any players to come out, and actually the players are getting what they need from the session. They don't need any extra. But
what about, we talked about practically as well. Like I say, we sat there, we watched the session, and then for the first half of it, maybe you weren't active, you were actually just watching, wasn't it? So that's quite different, isn't it, from a usual academy role when you're just coaching all the time. What's the difference? What's the challenges? Did you have to get used to that sort of thing? That actually stepping, just watching the session rather than being involved all the time. Was that tricky?
Yeah, it can be tricky. I think that one of the benefits of it is probably you get the opportunity to be able to see technically what the players need. So rather than watching the ball, watching what the team or the unit's doing, you can spend a lot more time actually focusing and thinking about actually what does that player need, which you may not have seen if you're watching 12 players. You might not have time to bullseye one player. So a lot of the time when I'm stood on the side watching, I can actually bullseye one particular player rather than just thinking about the whole training group. Yeah,
because we spoke about earlier, and I think that as well from my experience working as a technical coach within a team or a club, where like I said, it's a really powerful opportunity, I think, just to step back and watch the group, like I say, because when you're not in the chaos of delivering, and it can be quite intense, having that opportunity just to say, right, for example, player A, that's interesting, they're doing that, or like maybe they're weak foot receiving, or they're 1v1 play. I think that's a really powerful opportunity, isn't it, especially for someone in this role, right, to say, right, get a chance to step out of the chaos, and have a look and see what people need, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sometimes you try and do that, obviously, as a coach, but as a coach, you've probably pre-planned it, so you already know what you're looking out for, as opposed to, sometimes when I step into the sessions, I can be quite flexible and I can be quite loose with it, because you can spot things on the fly, set things up as and when you need, and actually really tackle some issues that you have with players on the spot. Because, sometimes you can find yourself saying, he needs to work on that, and never actually getting around to working on what the player actually needs. So it just gives me the benefit to say, actually, we know that this player needs to work on this. We can actually say that live in a session, and actually, do you know what? If they come over to me, I can take them aside and we can actually address that and start to work on it and give them some confidence to do it right then and there live.
And so you obviously do 9s to 14s. What's the challenge with that? Assume you've got a lot of players in theory to support and to see, haven't you? There's a lot of age groups.
Yeah, and I think sometimes, especially with the younger ones, I found that it kind of works twofold. Sometimes they see it as, oh, I'm getting extra work because I'm not good at something, and actually that can be, sometimes embarrassing for the players. So I found right at the start, some players would look over at the training session more than they'd be focused on what they're doing. Maybe they wouldn't necessarily want to come and work with me for that 20 minutes or 15 minutes because they know they've been pulled out of the training session for something. But actually what it gives you an opportunity to do is have kind of a closer relationship with that player. They feel it's more specific to them. They feel like they've got more attention, or they've got your attention for that minute, and ultimately hopefully makes them more confident when they go back in. I think with the older ones, they appreciate it as well, because they know actually what's going to get them to the next level. They want to know what's going to get them to the next level, and they want to be able to work on it, almost instantly as well.
Well, I mean, what are the challenges though between, from working over that amount of players and that amount of groups? What I mean, obviously, what's how do you? I mean, there's a lot. I mean, I can assume it's a lot. You can't get to see every player, right? That's the issue.
Yeah.
What are the main challenges with that?
The biggest challenge is spending, the right amount of time with players. So you can cover a lot of players, but you can spread yourself quite thin.
Yeah.
So you might be working with one player 1 week, and actually you might not work with them for another 4 weeks after that. So does the work that you've done really have a chance to set in if you're not doing it, repetitively over a number of weeks? That can be a challenge as well. And then also, when you've got so many talented boys that all want, a little piece of the extra, sometimes you, again, like I said, you can spread yourself really thin, and actually you're working with so many boys that you don't have a chance to really see the progression over a long-term basis.
Interesting. And I'm just thinking about, so for example, in terms of like practice design,
yeah.
I mean, how do you approach that? I mean, I watched one of your sessions earlier. You have 2 players out. You're working a bit on dribbling, a bit of in and out Ronaldo movements.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of coaches are maybe intimidated or don't understand or can't. They struggle with working with individual players or small groups. What's that like for you? What's that process like for you?
Yeah, I actually really like working with the smaller groups. I think it gives the players a better chance to ask the questions. I think sometimes when in bigger groups, they don't really like to ask the questions as much as they would when they're in, working 1-to-1 or even in small groups. But a lot of the practice that I do, I try and just design them and make them more bespoke. So I don't really have too much of a bank of sessions that I would just go to. I think it's more about seeing what practices maybe the coach is already doing, what aspects of that practice will the boys probably need to be successful, and then creating that practice around what either the player needs or what the practice is getting them to do.
Well, it's interesting because I remember John Allpress, the FA tutor, saying that really maybe that planning any session maybe is not correct. Maybe you should just put a session on and then see what you need to coach, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Coach what you see almost. But I suppose then I think that takes a lot of experience, doesn't it? Being able to say, okay, right, I'm starting a session, for example, okay, 1v1 defending that couple of those guys really struggling with their footwork. Put a whole session on for those couple of players. That's I suppose you have to be brave, but I suppose you have to be experienced, right, to be able to do that. Right, I can do that and just whack a session out, almost detail session out.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you've got to have, obviously, like you said, the skill set helps because then it gives you the range of techniques that you can work on with the players. But there's other ways around that, as we know, by visual aids as well, and getting other players to demonstrate as well. But yeah, it takes the experience really just to be able to adapt it on the fly. So you can do the same practice, but what one player can do really quickly and efficiently, maybe another player can't. So when that player's working well on it, how do you then move it on, especially from a technical aspect, whether it's left foot then because their right foot's really dominant, whether it's doing a combination of moves, whether it's adding a finish, whether it's adding levels of interference as well, or whether it's just actually they just need to work a pose. So even though it's 1-to-1 stuff, it's more a pose stuff rather than cone dribbling and beating mannequins.
And then so how would you for you, I mean, how do you judge success of a session? What gives the key tips for coaches who want to, create an individual or small group session which is going to be transferable to the game? That's what we're looking for, right?
Yeah, and I think a lot of my job is it's adding the confidence. So for me, the success is when they then have the confidence to try it. So a lot of the time especially when players you're trying to get them to develop a new skill, you're probably getting them to do that because sometimes they're not willing to try it. I.e. for left foot, for example, you'll see a lot of kids turn down probably shooting with their left foot if they're right-footed, and it's not necessarily because they can't, maybe because they haven't got the confidence in the technique under pressure yet. So when you work on something like left foot ball striking and they go into the game, it might not necessarily be the end product, what you want it to be, but all of a sudden if they now have got the confidence to be in the same situation and give that a try, I think that then starts to lead to the longer term success.
What I liked about your session earlier, which you watched, was the coach was doing a dribbling session, 1v1 session with an angle going in, going out, and then your session, a mini session, 2 players, and pretty much replicated the angle and the movements, what they were seeing to that. And I've always been a big advocate of that, saying, that's what we're going to do, try and break down the game, or the practice into its, into its smallest parts, really work on that, refine those, and then they go back into the game or that practice and then do that. I mean, that's really important, isn't it? Making sure, because people talk about unopposed or opposed, it doesn't really matter as long as it's linked to the game and players can see, right, I'm doing this because I'm going into the practice or going to the game, right? That's really key, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, again, linking to the confidence, because they built up more confidence in the technique that they were trying to do, they're more likely then to want to go and use that same technique when they're under pressure. I think players always fall back to what they know best when the pressure's on. Very rarely when they're under pressure will they go to something that hasn't got them any success. So again, just working sometimes separate from the group on what you want to actually be able to do in the group gives them the opportunity to get it wrong, figure out why they got it wrong, practice it again in a good environment, and then hopefully take it into the opposed situation. And again, when they find that it comes off, then you can always link it back to the work that was done prior to it, rather than it almost being sort of luck or a fluke. It can be more, you can link it more back to the fact that actually what we've done over there, the practice that we've put in there, has now provided this outcome in the game situation.
And what's the criteria for you to work with a player? I mean, what does that process look like in terms of, right, I'm working with this player this week or these players? What's that? Yeah, what's the idea behind that?
And I think that it's different between different age groups. Right. Essentially, I'm here to work with all the players.
Yeah.
But obviously, like we said, working with all the players is quite difficult to do. So at the younger age groups, it's more almost unit specific. So if we know that we've got a group of players that are more attacking minded, what we might do is group them together, and I might work, say, on some sort of attacking practice or attacking drill. Now that could be players that we think are really pushing on. It could be players that we think are striving to move forwards. And again, as we get to the older age group, it then becomes bullseye more players that we think actually with this extra detail, separate from the coaches that they've already got, will be enough to to push them on and excel them a little bit quicker.
So is it a case of stretching the best and supporting the players who need a little bit of extra support, basically, sort of hitting all those targets?
Yeah, absolutely. Because again, the coaches do their best, but if you're working in a group of 18, 19 players with two coaches, it's easy to sometimes miss players and players go by the wayside. So sometimes then it's good to have the extra person there that can just pick up some of those extra targets that you've set that you haven't really got round to helping the players with yet.
And I mean, you're a technical coach now, so technical specialist. What does a technical footballer look like to you? I mean, what is that? Do you have like a vision in your head, like this is the panacea, this is where I want to get to, this is what a top technical player looks like?
Yeah, I think.
And what are the qualities as well? I mean, give us.
Yeah, I was going to say, from a physical standpoint, I don't think it really matters too much, especially in terms of like sort of power and strength. I think it's more the coordination, the balance, the agility, the speed and change of direction. I think you tend to find that your most technical players are able to have those simple fundamental ABCs there. I think from the sort of the technical standpoint, you tend to find they'll be a bit more rounded, so good variation in sort of passing and receiving, being able to dribble, manipulate the ball, change the angle of the ball, play off front foot, and ultimately handle the ball under pressure. I think when you look at most technical players, when there's a sense of pressure or urgency on them to do something with the ball, they have the ability, in their feet to find the right solution.
And what is it? Does it look different in the 9s than it does to the 14s? I mean, is there a different? I'm assuming maybe more of a global approach, more position specific. I mean, what's the differences in that approach with the different age groups?
Yeah, I was going to say at the younger age groups, it's not too much about the position specific. It's just about arming them with as many tools as we can. So just literally give them as many skills as they can, and give them the opportunity to explore which ones actually really work for them. So at the start you'll have loads of kids doing like 360 spins and Cruyff turns and flip flaps, etc. But as they get older, I think they start to really find out which skills work for them, and they start to select the ones that they'll actually know that they'll do. And that links again to the position specific. So defenders tend to have more Cruyff turns in them, more outside hooks in them, whereas your attacking players that are a lot more front faced, they'll probably tend to have a lot more scissors in them, more step overs, etc.
And so going back to that, the 1v1, the skills. I mean, this morning we saw like a couple of dribbling sessions with a player front on. I mean, how do you break that down, the 1v1 duel? I mean, do you look at that quite specifically, quite in detail, different variations of that? For example, defender in front, defender behind.
Yeah.
Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah. So I think it's, again, front facing. which is probably the easiest one, or one of the easiest ones, where the players got the ball, the defender's already sort of in front of them, they can assess the space behind. Pressure from the side, which is probably one of the sessions that I've done many moons back, where that pressure is just right on the side of them, and they've got to be able to twist, turn. They've got to focus on looking after the ball, but they've got to focus on the pressures on them as well at the same time. And then the pressure from behind, which I definitely find with the youngest players that's the one that catches them out, because they have two things to think about. So yeah, that's how we'd break down our 1v1s: pressure from in front, pressure from behind, pressure when you got the ball to the side.
There's been a lot of research recently, a lot of talk, and about the majority of 1v1s in a game being pressure behind or from the side.
Yeah.
And a lot of questions saying, well, why do we spend so much time on the front? But I actually think it's the logical place to start with a young player, because it's almost that expressing to dribble forward with the ball and beat a player, and also getting those movements in. And I also think, in the game you think realistic, in the middle of the pitch it's so confined, it's so tight spaces, there's going to be lots of 1v1 with this pressure in the back. Yeah. But I don't think I'd ever start that journey with pressure in the back, if you like. I'd almost start always with that, player dribbling, and just because I think it's a natural sort of progression for a player to understand, to dribble forward and try and beat a player, and then understand behind and that sort of thing. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, I think a lot of the 1v1 duels start even without a ball. So if you think about games like tag, generally the concept is to get by somebody, to get to the other side, to get somewhere. There's usually a destination in place. So a lot of the time, if you're playing like tag games, it's not really with the pressure behind you, it's more the pressure in front. Okay, so again, as long as there's a destination in there.
Dodging, isn't it?
Yeah, as long as there's a destination, somewhere to get to. But again, it's easier for them to see the destination if it's in front of them, as opposed to finding the destination when the pressure's on the side or the back. So yeah, the front tends to generally be the easier one to start with, the one that they get the most success from, the one that they enjoy the most. And then again, the side and the back ones are just the ones that, again, will happen. But they can build in, you can layer that towards them getting front faced.
And obviously, there's a lot of innovation involved in this role. There's not many technical coaches who work across the age groups in the country at academy football. What's next for this role, do you think? Where would you like to take it? Do you think what more can you get out of this?
I think it's a role that has to be stretched, not just through the younger age groups. It has to go all the way through to almost sort of first team level. It's amazing sometimes when you even watch a first team game, how much you can see the technical differences, between two teams, i.e., maybe a League 1 or 2 team playing against a Premier League team. You can see the start, sometimes reality of the technical deficiencies in the players in the Premier League and lower down. I think it's one of them things where it has to be fun still. So a lot of the fun games will still be in the technical role. So I see a lot of people putting down ladders and hoops, and I watch the players do it, and it doesn't really look fun and enjoyable. So it's still, as a technical coach, I think they will still need to be a fun, enjoyable person that tests the players' technical ability, builds on that as well. And also making it a competitive thing as well. So not just working in isolation. I think actually the technical role will be more than just one coach, one player. I think it will be one coach, maybe 2 or 3 players.
Interesting. Dan, thank you, mate.
So thanks for having me.